you're excused. 'Cause you're always late, overweight, and totally rude. Honey, you're...
Oh, okay.
Podcast number 11.
Very official.
Hi. We have Davis on as a guest. It's a cool artist.
Hello, welcome.
Hey, Booze!
Got you a shout out.
Yay.
He's the artist. We have an artist on our podcast. Another one. Woo,
really
creative.
good, really good artist.
Yeah.
Well, I'll try to explain.
Absolutely phenomenal things.
I'll try to explain what this is about. So we call it the podcast for the creatively unworthy, and what that basically means is those of us that are dyslexic or have ADD or any of those different learning disabilities or disorders or deficits or whatever anybody wants to call it, they're usually super creative. And what happens is because of the dyslexia or ADHD, you're constantly being shamed by your teachers and your parents. And, and, you know, I spent most of my time with my nose against the blackboard when I was in the 3rd and 4th grade. And because of all of that, you build up a lot of shame, and you feel that you're you're unworthy of any praise because you never had it at that critical age. You know, for me, one of my drawings was on won an award. And I can still remember this girl looking at me and going, and this was back in the 50s. She goes, well, because I was getting too much attention. They brought in a television that was on San Francisco television. Ooh. And her comment to me was, well, all artists are a bunch of queers, excuse the language, but that's the way they talked back then, you know. What? And so I thought, I'm not gay. I'm not queer. I didn't even know what the word meant. But she was my 3rd grade nemesis, Barbara Bunn, which hopefully when she dies, she'll go to hell. Excuse me.
Larry.
Never mind. But anyway.
That's a great age to make enemies, gotta say.
Right?
Yeah. And she was part of this self-proclaimed spelling police, and she would go around and tell everybody when, you know, your lowest grades and say, you know, stuff like that. So that all creates this feeling of unworthiness, and that's what what this is about. All of us are artists here in this little group, or in our little group. So you fit right in.
You're creative. At some point, you're going to feel unworthy, and we're here to talk about it and maybe give some tips and tricks and insight. Maybe let other creatives not feel so alone in that unworthy feeling. Yeah.
Maybe do you ever feel unworthy of your art?
Oh, absolutely. It's so a bit about me. I do not have dyslexia, or if I do, then it's incredibly mild. But I do definitely have ADHD, and it's been like a lot of work going through, or like trying to get that self-worth from school, because I'm very bad at school. It's
what are you bad in? What subjects are you bad in?
Most of them.
Oh, joy.
I'm pretty sure last time I checked, my GPA was like below 2, which is not good for the place I'm in, the environment I'm in. In fact, my school was nice enough to publicly rank all of the students as far as grades go. And there's like 400-ish people in my class, like class of 2021. I'm graduating, but there's like 400-ish people in that class, and I ranked like 380th. So that was a great boost of self-esteem.
That's self-shaming. That's public shaming.
Yeah, that's kind of inappropriate to list all that. I mean,
well, it's
it's
not a list of names, but they tell you where you are on that list.
This would be the perfect time to show some of his drawings and paintings. Do you
Oh,
have
yeah.
anything you can just put up?
Here, I'll allow screen share. You can pull up your Instagram if
You
you want
guys-
to. Yeah. You don't have to, but you can.
Yeah, I don't.
It's amazing. His work is amazing, though.
Yeah. You really do have talented hands.
We can insert it later after if you
Oh, we
want.
can?
Oh,
Unless you
that's
have
true.
one right
Yeah,
now.
let's do that. Let's do that. Perfect.
I can
Yeah.
also pull it
Yeah,
up.
pull one
too.
up if you can, if you
Yeah.
have it.
It's easier for me
'Cause
editing later. I
the
don't.
kid
Just so you
rated
guys
it.
know, there's a squirrel outside my window hanging upside down, drinking from the hummingbird feeder. He's got it. He's upside down. got it
Squirrels-
tilted, figured out how to drink.
Squirrels are incredibly good at breaking into any type of feeder.
I'm
It's
blown away.
impressive,
And
actually.
this is also an example of Kristin's ADHD.
hmm
I couldn't.
Squirrel.
That's why I keep looking at him. Like, what the heck is he doing? He's like acrobating upside down, got it tilted, and it's
Yeah.
like dripping off his face.
I'm going to grab a picture that Kristin drew when she was really a young, very, very young girl, because it's my favorite painting. I'm going to be back in a second.
All right.
Hmm.
And I think I
amongst yourself.
almost have. There we go. Uh,
My art is much different now that I'm older. Just so you know.
I would hope.
Here, wait. Actually, I'll stop screen sharing so they can see the whole thing.
So this is, I forget how young she was when she drew this.
Aww.
Little
But-
barn in the.
She was like really, really, I'm talking about kindergarten or something, but the perspective of it is, and I get that, maybe there's a better way to show it. It doesn't have the glare. No, it doesn't have the glare, but the perspective of the building and the horse and everything, it's amazing. I mean, it's as good as a lot of people that try to do this stuff on purpose.
And
I love how you have it framed still.
you,
I framed it, of course, because I'm proud.
and you said that's when she was 6 years old, was it?
Oh, probably younger. Kristin, how old do you think that was? It was like when you were in
4
the
or 5,
preschool.
I think.
Yeah,
Oh,
Yeah.
preschool.
Little,
Yeah, that
little,
is-
little.
that is incredible.
It's like 7, 8-year-old stuff.
The kids are
My
trying to
favorite
draw a
one that
picture
you
of
Like
have-
even understanding what perspective is, like at that age it's not going to be conscious, but understanding that like there's a horizon line and things will be on it at least like subconsciously at that age, it's incredible. Like so the artist that I see as the best artist alive right now is a man named Kim Jung-gi. And what he does is he's like able to, grab a pen and draw anything out of his mind and just draw for hours and hours and fill like an entire wall sized piece of paper with just these, beautiful, incredibly detailed illustration with like perfect perspective, and he can draw anything just straight out of his head, no sketching. It's insane. I was watching an interview with him from like a while ago, and like they were explaining like he had always been like just incredibly in tune with perspective, and he like started drawing stuff from like 1 point and 2 point perspective back in like kindergarten with like crayons, which is insane. And so like if you're able to at least like subconsciously understand perspective at that age, then I think you've got a pretty good path ahead of you.
Yeah, that's for sure. Her art now is like still pretty like stellar.
And what the problem is that I didn't know what to do with it at the time. I was in my I guess I was in my 40s back in the day then, and nobody ever explained to me how to support an artist. And that's kind of what this whole thing that we're doing is, just like your name on some board, it's just bullshit. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that really is so, yeah, there's his work. Oh my
Yeah.
God. Look at this.
Yeah. Like,
mean,
so
did you say you just like doodled this out of
Stuff
like
is
just for
so-
like
Scale.
just
The mermaids are just so cool. Oh my gosh.
Look at that. I mean,
I just
wow.
love it.
And I'll
It's like
bet you,
haunting.
and this perspective too? I mean,
Yeah.
like damn.
That's the way I look, by the way.
That's the way you look like that.
I like
Yeah,
it.
if I didn't have any clothes on, I'd still look like that.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah.
Sorry, can't help it.
Zoom. Let me see those hands
Where?
to the right.
To the right?
The hands going like this. I want to see those.
Oh, bottom
Oh.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Wow.
It's really just I drew a thumb and then 5. Or
Yeah,
thumbs.
you did a great job. That's awesome.
Really,
That
I'm really just still learning. I've got a lot to get like a good grasp on. I've explained this to Rebecca. I think that like what defines skill or like experience is speed in a way. It's not like you should only focus on getting faster. That's not the point. It's the point, or the point is like the more experienced you are, the quicker you're able to do something right. Like anyone,
Yeah.
I feel like if you give someone like enough time, they can do anything. They can make any masterpiece. But
Okay, wait, stop. Let me stop you right there. Not true. Very few people can do this, and very, very few. See, you've been taught, and I've been taught, or our culture's been taught, that anybody, if they just, everybody's creative, and it's bullshit. It's not true. It was and I got this statistic from Jordan Peterson. It was something like
Talent.
1 or 2% of the population is creative. You know, it's incredibly small percentage. And yet we
And even
tell
if you're
everybody,
creative, you're not necessarily good at drawing. Doesn't mean you're good at drawing, but you're definitely good at
oh,
drawing.
he's beyond good.
Yeah.
He's on the way
Like
to being
you've got a whole style.
yeah. So
really, at this point, I'm just trying to figure out what I'm doing.
Wow. That's cool.
and see, part of what we wanted to do in this podcast is tell the truth that this isn't ordinary. This is extraordinary, and you have to let that sink in, because I relate to you. I mean, I relate to being on the lowest. I mean,
Wow.
I was contemplating actually killing myself when I was in the 3rd grade because they were going to hold me back, because I thought it meant that I was, an idiot. And besides, I really liked Gail, and she was going to be in the 4th grade. And I knew the way, no 4th grader would go out with a 3rd grader, hold back. It was like, I would have jumped out the window, but I knew that Barbara Bunn would have been there and looked at everybody. My body stretched out over the concrete after I jumped out of the 3rd story window. And then she would have just said, see, this is what happens when your kid can't spell. So I didn't do it. There was the only reason I didn't.
That was an unfortunate
Everyone
thought.
listening out there, let's all find Barbara Bunn online and give her some shit.
No,
do not.
targeted harass.
She's actually a real person.
Yeah.
I've just never forgot her. I actually thought Barbara.
If you're listening, Barbara, come from a place of love instead of shame.
I'd heard that she'd gone on and went to Stanford, and when we landed on the moon in 1969, that she was the one that originally said, it's not, that corrected the astronaut when he said, "It's 1 step for man, something step for mankind," and she corrected it. There was the spelling police, the art police that come in and they want to,
I bet she's a lot of fun at parties, but
Yeah, she sounds like a real treat.
I've got so I try not to think negatively about people. I see it like this. So little story, however many years ago, my mom went out shopping and she brought home peaches, and I like peaches, so I went out to eat a peach, and I bit into it, and it was like weird and mushy and gross. So I was like, ugh, I don't want this, and I threw it in the trash. Turns out I bit into a bruise. The rest of the peach was just fine, but it was just the bruise that I bit into. And I think I think people are the same way. They have good and bad aspects of them. So if you have someone in your life who's you don't like, you probably just don't like that side of them. Not to say that you should try to be friends with everyone, or, you know, if someone does something bad, that's okay. Like, you know, we should hold people to a standard of kindness, but I try not to
I
think
like that,
negatively of
Bruce.
like people as a whole. But to what you're talking about, like only like a couple percent of people being creative, I'm not sure. Like, I wonder how that works. Like, is that like creative? Because so okay, I see art as just communication. It's just like another way of communication. You know, everyone. Hold on. Everyone's able to like speak with words because that's what we were taught since kindergarten, or like even before. But you know, not or everyone's able to draw because we're not, you know, expected to. So I feel like art is just like some sort of communication that goes, or that's sort of abnormal. It's like auxiliary, and or so like I think that about music, about like, you know, uh, writing, literature, someone just communicating something in a way that not everyone does. So I'm not sure like how, because I feel like everyone has some sort of way they express themselves, be it through like hobbies or.
There's the difference between expressing yourself and being truly creative. You know, what is being creative? Um,
Like we
I
interviewed
don't.
that scientist, and he's or the data man, and that was creative in itself. I guess it doesn't have to be about art. The problem solving can be creative.
well, problem solving is
The
very
way you
creative. I just
pack a
mean,
bag, if you're a grocer bag girl at the grocery store, could be creative if you do it, you know, add your own flair to it. Anything, anyone could. I don't know about that fact because I don't know.
I think it was more like 10% of the population is creative, something like that. But here,
I
Or
think
maybe
creative.
only 10% is aware that they're.
but here's my point, Davis, in all of this is that it doesn't matter what the percentage is or whatever. It's that, and this isn't just this is I'm not just making this up, but it's years. Like, I'm now 73 years old, so I've lived through all of this stuff. And for somebody who's creative to make a living is extremely difficult. You hear, if you listen to this Peterson character, you know, he'll just say, look, you know, make sure you have another job that you enjoy, well, and then work on, because very few people ever make it as a profession. I haven't met another writer like myself who has been a self-sustained writer for like 30 years. Most of them, it's part-time, or they, you know, they have another job, or they whatever. But the to actually live that life, I mean, it's it, I've had to deal with the stress of. I'll just give you an example. Like, the very first book I wrote, it got published, and then the second book I wrote got published by Random House. So I had two books in the books. I thought this was easy. I thought everybody could write. I didn't know that everybody couldn't write. And I can remember, you know, going to a book signing. It was at B. Dalton's, and I remember this one guy said, you know, because he was looking at my book, and I said I was dyslexic, and or I forget what it was, but he just said, well, are you crazy? Are you crazy? And it's just like, it was such an insult. And so this is what I call the farmers of the world. They're the people that have, I call them hunters and farmers. The hunter is somebody who needs a lot of stimulus. You know, they're the artists, the creators, the engineers, the people, you know, the special forces, the Navy SEALs. These guys need lots and lots of stimulus. Now, the stimulus could come from art, or it could come from, for me, a lot of it was risk. Early on, I took lots and lots of risks. And and what that does is it creates dopamine, and the dopamine, opens up the prefrontal cortex and allows you to think in a, norm, be able to be able to think in a classic sense. What would happen was when I was your age and I would take a test, suddenly, and this all came about with meaning. Like, let's say I had to take the test to get into the Air Force Academy, and I took this test. I literally would sit there and look at the same sentence and read it over and over. And I could read, but I'd read this. I couldn't get the meaning. Like, it didn't mean it. I'd lost it. What happened was the meaning of taking a test long ago when I was a little kid became fight or flight. Well, in the brain, below the neocortex is the what it's called, but it's the flight or fight part of the brain. And when you're in that, there's no memory. You're in fight or flight, and that means blood rushes from the brain and goes out to the extremities so you can run and get away. Well, that's what happens for a lot of boys, especially boys, when they go to take these tests. They're in a fight or flight, and all I would do is hear the ticking of the clock, tick, tick, tick. And I literally, my grades, my SAT scores are so low. I'm convinced that in some building where they have them, I'm on the list of the lowest SAT scores ever recorded. I'm sure of it. And I call the
like SAT scores, or at least like the ACT is the one I took, is very, very bad if you are slow. And if you are if you need to take time to digest problems, then you're basically screwed. You're not going to do well no matter how well you actually do.
Or how many grades it pulled you back. It doesn't matter.
You're given 60 seconds per question. That's not enough, especially if you have to read a whole essay.
Unless you have unless you have a different type of, I should have this all written out. I do have it written out. It's hard for me to remember off the top of the head. But I call a farmer is somebody who could sit and pick bugs off leaves and not get bored. So they're the ones that can do this route learning, and so they and also has to do with sounds too. There's a lot. I'm trying to throw too much at you, but there's a lot of evidence behind all this. But basically, I call hunters and farmers because for years the farmers have been tried to squelch the hunter brain. An example of this is Jordan Peterson, who says he's on this mission to say, the whole school system now is basically full of these farmers. He doesn't call them that.
Oh yeah, it's horrible.
It's horrible.
School's awful.
And the gatekeeper to school is who? It's the farmer. They keep you and I out of the higher, of the top universities,
It's also
the way I got in was
divergent kind of thinking.
Yeah.
The way I got in was by going to junior college, and then you automatically got to go into the, 4-year state university. But there's no way I could have passed the tests.
I would love to rant about how awful our school system is and how it basically punishes creativity. It's school is about, but being well or doing well in school is not about understanding what you're given. It's about finding what the teacher wants and then doing it. Does the teacher want you to just memorize this list of items? Well, then you figure that out. You memorize the list of items. You don't complain about it, and you just go on with your day. And you don't actually digest anything. And so I want to become an art teacher. That's my big goal. It's my dream. And I need to figure out how to break that. I need to figure out how to make a creative space in this inherently or uncreative environment where you're just encouraged to, do what you're told, shut up, and then then you're told how you do is gonna affect how you are the rest of your life. It's it's incredibly stressful when someone slams a paper in front of you and they say write a 5-page essay. If you screw up on this, you're going to be flipping burgers for the rest of your life and you're going to be miserable. That's a horrible thing to do to a teenager.
Yeah.
And
just to show you that this isn't a new problem, this book, it's called Frame of Minds, and it was written by Liam Hudson, Frame of Minds, ability perception and self-perception in the arts and sciences. And he did his PhD back in 1964, I guess it was. He went around the country in England and he tested all of these students that were going on to Cambridge. And he found what he called them was there was the scientist and the artist. And he found that the kids that scored the highest on the IQ test that were going to go into Cambridge scored the low, they weren't artists at all. Whereas the artists scored low on the IQ test and they were high in art. So he devised a test, and I love this. It's called the object test, and it would say how many uses can you find for a brick. And so if the scientist kids would say, well, you can make a bookcase, build a building, and do make a or hold or make something straightforward. Build, it'd be about three answers. And then they would ask the creative kids, and it would be like start a revolution, put bricks around a body to get rid of it, throw it in the ocean, use it to grind up and use for paste powder or kill somebody. A lot of them were like poison things to do. But the list would go on, and some of the most creative stuff. And he went like, oh my God. And he tested all of these kids throughout England that were going on to, the top kids and then also the bottom kids or the artists, and found the same thing was throughout. And he came up with the words convergent and divergent. And what that means is the scientist kids and like your school teachers have their teaching processes, they converge to one single correct answer. Whereas the artist is divergent. He sees many answers. So if I give you a multiple choice question, a test with multiple choices, you might see every single one of them has a practical use, whereas the convergent will converge to the single correct answer. And he goes on, and he wrote about this years ago, but nothing that I can tell has changed, because here we are talking about the same thing that he was talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's all like to do with our brains, and we're not exactly evolving very quickly. And you don't have to, this is going to sound like super pretentious. You don't have to worry about like throwing too much at me, because like my favorite subjects in school are psychology and anatomy. I love learning about how people tick. It's so fun. But it's like, I don't think, you can't, like, it's not, all the teachers' fault for how awful school is. It's also like, grades are the basis for funding. If, kids get good grades, or if like a school has like a lot of kids with good grades, then that school will get more funding because it's doing well. So it's like, the administrators of the school, like the superintendent who knows nothing about teaching but has full control over the systems, they'll basically go like, you need to do this, this, and this. You need to get us the best grades, even though grades don't really mean anything. And yeah, it's just
way at the top.
Yeah, and it's frustrating.
So that you said you wanted to find, first of all, I think your idea about, I love psychology. I study it. I mean, I never stop learning. I'm constantly reading. I was at the library,
Absolutely.
all the latest things.
Same. That's how I found you, Jordan Peterson. I listen to psychology lectures all the time.
Yeah. By the way, I was watching Jordan Peterson giving this, they were just I call them the farmers were attacking him. They were these feminist liberal women that were just on a bent to make him wrong, and he was sitting there listening to it. And I watched his leg. I watched his leg and his foot were tapping like crazy. And you know what he was doing when he was doing that? That creates dopamine. That was opening up. That's, I thought, oh my God, there's a perfect example of him, my legs used to bounce off the table. I would sit there, remember, and your legs start bouncing like crazy?
Oh, Jimmy leg, yeah.
That function, that's your mind creating a flow of dopamine, trying to open up your thought pattern so you can, take your test or learn it, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I might seem a little aggressive to you, but I've had, 60 years of these bastards shaming me, making me feel like a dumb, trying to make me feel like a dumb shit. And yet,
Yeah.
you know, my artwork's not bad. You know, it's,
Yeah, his artwork's on the walls behind him, all those paintings.
I'll show you,
Yeah.
like,
I'll
for a
say,
second, I have ton. My whole room is full of paintings and art that I've done to change everywhere, around the corner. And anyway, it doesn't matter. But that and
I love that one that's right behind you.
this
Yeah, the one that's right behind you. Yeah, and that's
this
him,
one's
right?
that one's not mine. That one I
That's
brought
you,
from Cambodia. Oh, this one. That was
not the Buddha.
oh
That one.
yeah. This was I don't know if you can see it. How do I get it? Boom. That was me in the jungle. You know, and now the
Mhm.
creative part of this for me is I created a wall, but I put Vietnamese names, the names of Viet Cong that were killed. You know, versus like you always hear about the wall with the 58,000 Americans.
Yeah,
I thought, hey, I should do a wall for them.
flipped.
Anyway,
Yeah.
That's nice of you.
And
thank
I
you.
also feel like before we move on, I want to say that like it's ADHD, you know, attention deficit disorder, but it's really just like the difference between convergent, divergent thinking, and like your brain processes something differently. And they're labeling everybody who has something like that disabled, or you know, you have a disorder, like your brain's broken. But it's really just a different way of thinking. And like I was gone for a little bit, so I don't know if Larry told that story, but when he was in the war, like wouldn't you say that your hunter brain, your
Oh, I was at
divergent
home in the
thinking, like
jungle.
saved you, like because
Yeah.
you're getting distracted, but you're listening to all these things, and you know,
Well, the
just like
first
a
time
different way
I
to
heard the term
exist.
sixth sense, um, and I went back and I looked at my books and my autobiographical. I've written a couple of books about myself 20 years ago about you know being in the war, and the term sixth sense comes up a lot. And guys would say, "Oh, you have a sixth sense." I sort of knew when the ambush was going to happen. I knew where the enemy was. I knew, and I was never afraid. I was always felt like, you know, I was kind of in control of it was like I went to the head of the class, and within 6 months of being in the army, they made me a sergeant. I got a battlefield commission as sergeant. That takes 3 years today, you know, or 6 years. No, 6 years to become a sergeant. They made it in 6 months. You know, so I went from the guy in the back of the class that was having trouble to the head of the class. And then the kids that were the smartest would freak out. Like
Mhm.
we took out on this one mission, this guy that was way smarter than most of us in my company. And we were always surrounded by enemy soldiers because it was 5-man team, you know, way out like you see in the movies, you know, except I really did it, you know, way out in the jungle. And they got surrounded one night, and the overload, this is for the farmer brain, the rote, the kind of the convergent brain, yeah, let's call it the farmer brain. He couldn't take all of the input, you know, whereas the hunter brain, I was thriving on it. You know, I was talk about, I'd never, they would say, well, you need to take, here's some dextrosaphenamine to keep you awake in the jungle. And I go, I don't need that. I'm like never slept. I was like constantly awake because it was the most exciting, you know, everything was vivid. And when I went to write this book, the first book I wrote, I remembered everything. I could remember guys' names. I could picture in my mind their names on their chest. All that stuff was right there. Now I thought everybody could do this. That's the point of this podcast. I thought, or you know, you think, or you know, discount down your talents. You think everybody can do this. And I'm saying not everybody can do this. Not even close. Not if you put a gun to their head and said, I'm going to pull the trigger if you don't draw a painting as good, half as good as one you've done. And they would actually end up going, okay, shoot me because I can't do it. You know? So part of this whole thing is to reinforce your talent, but then also hopefully we'll get into things that we've all done to try to utilize that talent. For me, I became a ghostwriter because I found out that not everybody could write. Boom. So I created a business that I would sit down and I could in an afternoon draw out, and it was funny that you said you're that guy that drew stuff out. I would draw out the whole guy's life on a great big board. And I remember the first time I did it, I was kind of embarrassed because, you're doing it publicly. In other words, people are sitting there looking at you, and I would draw all these things out, and it would just be amazing. And they couldn't do it. So I ended up charging them, a lot of money to do this for them. And then, I made a living at that for 30 years. So that was one way I found. Like you said, you're looking for things. So an art teacher, that's perfect because it'll still allow you. And by the way, if you don't follow your skill set or your what you love doing, you will be miserable. Every time I'm not doing art or not writing, if I'm trying to do stuff that's outside of that, it's like I'm bored out of my freaking mind. I hate it. So you've got to keep that stimulation.
Yeah, it's like, a couple of things. If you want to go into a career for art, you have to really, really love art. If you do it for the money, you're sort of dumb.
Yeah.
Because like, one, you're not going to get paid a whole lot. Like, it's just art isn't seen as very valuable. I don't feel like, at least not as much as it should be.
I paid a lot of money for paintings. This painting over here, this woman painted. You can't see it very well, but she paid $8,000 for that like 15 years ago, and those paintings her paintings are selling for like 30 and 40,000. So you can make a lot of money.
You can. It's not. The thing is, you see
norm.
the successes. You see the successes way more than you see the failures, and it's just not accurate. Like,
well, I'm going to predict you're going to make a lot of money at this. Okay, so you can try to say no.
I plan on being a teacher, so I wouldn't bet on it.
Okay. Whatever.
That's so aggressively.
But then and it's also like, you spend however many hours working on a thing, like something that I usually do if it's like a quick sketch or like something that I only put a little bit of time into, because like, I love art, but I can't, put all of my energy into it. I need to do other things. Like it'll be like 4 hours and people will look at it for 3 seconds. That's just not like, if you're doing it for other people, then you're just not going to get any value out of it.
Right. You got to do it for yourself. And by the way, one of the things I suggest you do, go to Europe. You want to see art? It'll blow.
I would love to. I need to go to the Louvre like at least one point in my life. I need to go there with my iPad and
look at how he's coming alive.
Yeah. That got me excited.
And the other thing I want to talk about is, I feel like it's like a huge misconception that like people with ADHD aren't paying attention. I feel like it's the exact opposite. They're paying too much attention.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm just speaking from personal experience, and it's like it affects everyone differently. I have I think it was called inattentive type ADHD. I don't get hyperactive in fact I have really, really low energy, but it's just like it's more of a motivation thing than a attention thing, I feel, because like it's really hard for me to block out stuff. I'm always like, listening to sounds, I'm always seeing things. So if it gets overwhelming, I need to remove myself from the situation. I can't zone anything out. And like with school, I could only do well on tests because I pay attention. I absorb all of the information. Like you were talking about, Larry, like I could remember everything so, vividly, but it's just, so like if I was given a test and it was just like, this happened, select the right answer. It's like, it was so easy, but I was given a piece of paper, like, this is your homework, get it done by Saturday, and I need to go home. It's like, I don't care about it. It's not something I'm into. So it's like, again, a motivation thing. I'll just forget about it.
I would say it's a meaning thing. It's the motivation. It's meaning. You create, when I said Europe, because Europe is a suppository of the great art. I mean, cities are art. You go to you go to Prague, and it'll blow your mind. You walk
Mhm.
around in Bulgaria, in these ancient, these cities, it's, at least if they weren't destroyed during World War II, you it you I mean, I remember going to, when I went to Amsterdam, and I literally walked in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. I walked in and there was a painting on the wall, and I stood there like this for an hour and a half, just staring at this one. I hadn't even looked at the other ones. I just was blown away. When
Mhm.
And then, go to Florence and look at Michelangelo's David. Now there's people in there going like, oh yeah, okay, yeah. I thought the Sistine Chapel would be bigger, blah blah. And I looked at this David as like inspired by God. I mean, how do you sculpture an arm out of one piece of granite, and
Mhm.
that's not, he didn't glue it on. He
Yeah.
carved all this thing, Michelangelo. And you go
Yeah.
there. And by the way, if you go, when you go to you go to Florence, and you go to this one church, I can't remember the name of it, but in this one church are a bunch of high school buddies that all grew up in the same time period, and they're all buried in the church. It's Michelangelo, Galileo, another, I can't think of the other one. There's a third real, and I'm like, oh my God, it'd be like Elon Musk and Bill Gates, and and a couple of the other, guys are all buried in the same, grew up at the same time period. So there's
Mhm.
weird kind of things that happens in art and and in science, that there'll just be an explosion, and you'll see a group, and Malcolm Gladwell's written about this in some of his books, but you'll see a cluster of these thinking that came out around the same time period. And the computer is a perfect example of it. All of those guys from who's the Apple guy?
Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs, and you can name a bunch of the top guys, and we're all born within about 3 or 4 years of each other, and then of course they had access to computers when my age group didn't.
Mhm.
But you'll see a region. So like you're looking, they went to Silicon Valley, that's where that thought process was accepted. Um, MIT calls dyslexia the MIT disease. And it's like all of these engineers that go to MIT, they're dyslexic. And I even read that NASA is the National Air, what's it called?
Mhm.
NESA. 50% of the engineers that they want to hire dyslexics because of creativity is really lateral thinking. That's my best example of it. So, you take one idea from here and you put it together over there. It's like this algorithm. I mean, not algorithm, but and what do you call it? An anagram. Where you can take letters and put them on.
Mhm.
But anyway, so there's different schools that will, you want to be a writer, you go to University of Iowa. That's like the Harvard for writers. If you want to be a scientist with dyslexia and end up a super engineer, you go to MIT. So art, I don't know where the main art school is. I don't know what that is. Maybe it's
I'm pretty sure LA is like just a huge
oh yeah, LA would totally
Like-
be that.
spot for art.
But then
Juilliard.
yeah, oh yeah,
And there's like
Juilliard.
yeah,
Yeah.
Juilliard.
Watts Atelier, big school.
Kristen, you're being awful quiet. Kristen's another super creative person who found a niche in reality shows as an editor, because she can, and I've always seen this, but she would take something that she didn't even know how it worked and like figure it out. And she couldn't tell me how she figured it out, but she would just figure it out. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. And she's turned that into a career. So
Yeah, story producing and some editing on the sides.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's very content architecty. Like Dad just said, I could take something someone said from over here and mix it with this shot over here and some dialogue over here, and then you have this whole complete thought from these random sound bites. And storytelling is creative, and I love storytelling. I love communicating. I like small groups, but I can definitely do big groups, but I prefer one-on-one so I can see the eyes and the facial expressions and if they're paying attention or if I've lost them or the tone and
So
yeah.
Now I'm still just a kid, and
How old are you?
I've got I'm like turning 18 in
That's the only question on the test, by the way.
15 days.
Woohoo!
But so like there's still a lot of life ahead of me and a lot of things I have yet to learn. So I don't know entirely what creativity is, at least not to me. And and I feel like it'll be a while before I know, but I do know that, or I have a feeling that right now, how I see creativity is someone's ability to like take bits and pieces of whatever they find and mix it together in some way that is new, or like maybe new isn't the right word. Humans have been around for so long, it's hard to have an idea that's entirely new, but it's you and it's your way of doing it, and that's special because you are the first you.
Yeah.
And I feel like creativity is probably comes easier to people who aren't normal. Like, someone grows up, no mental illnesses, they don't have like, or like for me, I've got ADHD, I have like crazy depression, anxiety, and like I feel like that has led me down a different path than or a normal person, and because of that I have to get creative. If I want to go through a day without hating myself, basically I have to figure it out instead of it just coming naturally to me. And if you have dyslexia, then your ability to piece together stuff like writing is harder, at least writing that you read it. At least that's the sense that I get. Again, I don't have it. And ADHD, your ability to focus and be motivated for things is different, so you need to figure out, you basically have to figure out life in a way that no one's really able to teach you. No one's normally able to teach you.
Okay, you nailed it. That's it.
Yeah.
One of the things I've done is
navigating through life as a creative.
I've flipped all of the words that I was told I was around. Or my friend John Fox, I've gone through years of therapy. I could get really depressed too, but I had the advantage of going to therapy, and I'm this really great guy that was worse off than I ever was. And we flipped around all of the words, like, when they say, well, you're really distracted, you can't focus on anything. Well, when I was in the jungle, if I wasn't distracted, the enemy, they step on a thing, you'd be dead. So your focus is spread all out. And then suddenly when you've got to focus, it hyper focuses on in. So, I will hyper focus so much that I'll sit down and start like I'm working on a screenplay. I'll look up and 6 hours has gone by and I couldn't even tell you where the time went. I am lost in it, and I am in heaven when I'm doing that, or if I'm doing a painting that I get lost in, I'm in heaven, especially if I come up something creative, like putting enemy soldiers on a wall that with me looking at it in the jungle, like that's creative. I had to go and look up and make sure that the names were spelled right. Well, I went even further than that. I went to Vietnam and found the names on that. They have, different villages will have the names of the Viet Cong guys that were killed there. So their names, and I took those names and put them on. So I even turned this into a journey,
Mhm.
But I went through every single one of those, and I've got a list. Did I send you that list, Rebecca, of the flip around? I took every single thing and flipped it
Yeah,
and
I don't think you sent me that one.
showed it as an attribute rather than a negative.
Mhm.
Um, so I got to tell you the story when this stuff becomes valuable. The hunter farmer and hunter, just that's a category I say dyslexic, ADD, all of that falls under. Anybody who's creative is like at the hunter. It's a hunter brain. So where this comes invaluable, it's World War II. We just get bombed by the Japanese. Okay, the Japanese pilots, the Navy pilots, were the best in the world. They'd been fighting for 10 years in China before they even bombed us. These guys had experience. They invented the term dogfighting. And then we got the Luftwaffe. These guys had been, fighting for 5 years before we ever got into the war. So you've got these two great armies, and suddenly here's the USA is in it. And so they start their flight school, and they suddenly found that their best pilots were flunking out. So they hired this guy, and he actually ended up being, his name is Gilbert. He was a lieutenant colonel. He goes there, and he discovered that what happened was the best pilots had a divergent thinking pattern. And what that's like, remember in the movie Top Gun and Tom Cruise, she goes, "What were you thinking?" He goes, "I wasn't thinking." When you're up there, you can't think. Well, that's the fighter pilot. So these divergent thinkers were you didn't know what they were going to do. Now, example of the convergent thinker, the guys that were passing the test and becoming pilots, the officers that did, when we were flying B-52s into Hanoi, they would fly the same route in and the same route back. And the reason for it was because they were save on fuel. Well, then they get shot down, and they couldn't figure out what. That's the convergent thinking pattern. Well, we'll save on fuel, so we'll fly straight in and straight back. And the Vietnamese would go, "Oh, so stupid." They just set their guns out for the same pattern going back. And I've collected all of these stories of and he actually changed the way they hired pilots, not hired pilots. They promoted the pilots. They were called warrant officers. That's when the warrant officer program got started. And one of the great stories. You ever see the movie The Right Stuff?
I don't think so.
That'd be a great one to watch. It's about the astronaut program, and the one guy that was the premier pilot was John, not John Glenn, was I'll think of his name in a second, but he was what the other pilots all knew him as. He was the best of the best, but he didn't have a college degree. And matter of fact, he couldn't get into flight school. He couldn't get in, so he became a flying. They made him a sergeant, and he could take apart the engines and put them back together again, and he knew so much about it that later on, like even today, when you hear pilots on the phone and they talk like, "Well, now we're coming in," they talk in that pattern. That's this guy's pattern. I'll think of his name again in a second, but he was one time flying, and some transcontinental plane got in trouble. And he said, "Okay, explain to me what's going." And he figured it all out and told him what to do. He'd never been in that plane. During the Korean War, he landed. They got a North Korean guy defected. He went in the MiG. There was no training manual. It was all in Korean, and he just took it up and he flew it. He went, "Yeah, it's pretty good, but it won't do it. Inverted turn." It's like, what? Damn! I wish I could think of his name.
I think an aspect of creativity then.
He broke the sound barrier too. That's the guy that broke the sound barrier. He was a test pilot,
Ah,
but he couldn't
I
become an
think
astronaut because he didn't have a college degree.
I think an aspect of creativity, then you touched on this like at the near the beginning of this podcast, is just a willingness to be uncomfortable
Yeah,
with
great.
risks, or like to take risks, or just to be able to fail. Maybe it's not willingness to be able to fail, but like sort of a comfort with being uncomfortable, if that makes sense. Like
It makes total sense.
yeah.
you faced challenges, you faced hardships in your life, you're used to, not exactly getting what you want all the time. So you're more willing, or you can be more willing to like just get out there and fail.
Yeah,
Because
take risks.
The United
uh,
States is the most creative country in the world, and there are other countries that aren't, like Japan. They beat you if you misspell. I've seen pictures of cans over somebody's head, banging it because they could. They're a whole culture about perfection. Everything has to be perfect, and Chinese are the same way. They really have this mentality of they will take what you've done and they will make it better or fix it or make it their own, but they don't create anything. My big joke: when's the last thing that came out of China that was new and creative? I'll wait while you figure it out. But you don't have to. It's those little handcuffs. Remember those little Chinese? It's my joke.
is
It's a joke.
Genshin? Never mind.
Is
It
Genshin
doesn't matter.
Impact?
I'm
Yeah,
Is that what
using
you're
isn't that
gonna
one
say?
Chinese?
I think that's Korean.
Korean?
Jaeger.
what I'm meaning.
Yeah,
What I'm
Genshin Impact.
saying that is you can't offload creativity. You can't send it to another country. So we're all worried about, oh my God, we're going to lose our edge. And so, no, we're not, because we're allowed to fail. China, you're not allowed to fail. Japan, you're not allowed to fail. I've been living in Asia for the last 10 years, and I see it in their school system. That route learning.
a
That
lot of farmers.
they don't. One of the biggest complaints for the Cambodians that graduate from college, there's several complaints, but one of them is no initiative. In other words, they could see the problem right there, but they're not going to go and do anything about it because it's kind of the tall poppy gets cut down. So their culture is not to take the initiative. They let somebody else do it.
Yeah, and that's like another huge problem with our school system. It doesn't, like, you learn through failure.
You learn through failure. Thank you.
So
exactly.
telling someone you can't fail or your life will suck, they're not going to learn anything then.
No.
Yeah.
And like,
yeah. Exactly.
I feel like experience, or I don't feel like, it's just, experiences are infinitely more powerful for learning than just like getting told something. I can tell you that, an apple is red however many times I want, but if you haven't seen an apple, then you won't really know. And so I feel like school should not be about like trying to, hammer in, this shit into kids' heads. It should be about telling them how to learn.
You know why school was created? School was created during the turn of the century to create just enough education for factory workers. Even the way it's set up, the bell that rings lets the bell in the factory. The way that they're set, the seats are all in order. That was all a process of learning to be good factory workers, and we've never changed from that. We keep that same classroom.
And like a lot of the modern curriculum is really heavily shaped by the Cold War. Today we're required to take a foreign language class because America was afraid that their people graduating high school were stupid and couldn't be spies. So you have to know how to speak another language, and you have to know how to do math well, and you need to have enough science experience to make a bomb. And it's always been for a purpose rather than actual education, I feel.
Mm-hmm.
You know what's interesting is I was watching the Queen Elizabeth show, docu-series or whatever it is. And she wasn't taught like any real stuff when she was growing up. She was just taught how to like eat her food with the right spoon or serve tea properly. When I heard that, I was like, wait, what? And the men, that were in charge of her, they were given education. But, well, I guess that's a whole different, that's women versus men's education. But I just found that fascinating that the queen wasn't required to have an education at all. And she chose to go get it for herself. She brought in tutors and basically said, I'm going to teach, I want to learn. Why wasn't I taught these things? Because she, wanted to be the best she could be. I just found that fascinating. I was like, wow, even people in power, there's someone above her keeping her in the dark in a way to keep their power. It's just, it starts at the top and it trickles. It's just insane how
in Cambodia, the prime minister of Cambodia has a third grade education. People don't like, what? No, he has a third
easier
grade
to control
education,
that way.
and he's been in power for 30 years, and he rules by fear. He uses fear. He was part of the Khmer Rouge, and then went on, escaped and went Vietnamese on their side, and then he came back to Cambodia. But he never went to school, and most of the people, the older generation, have zero, they're illiterate. And the one of the things that the Chinese communists really wanted to keep, this is not the Chinese communists today, there's been some great leadership there that's changed things a lot, but back under Mao, if you were a school teacher, during the Cultural Revolution, the school teachers were harassed, and a lot of them, they were paraded as, anybody that spoke out against the government, you were executed back in the day. But I met this one girl that was a guide, and she told me her name. I mean, all these guides, this is China today. And so this guide, the guides all have names like Brad and Brittany and, these movie star names. And we're like, come on, your name is not Brittany. What's your real name? And she said, it was Tun Su something or other. I said, wow, what does it mean? She goes, well, the literal translation means little hatred. It was like, well, okay, this is a story I got to hear. And she looks around and makes sure there's none of the other guides there. But her father was a school teacher during the Cultural Revolution under Mao, and he basically ended up committing suicide. She was born on the anniversary of her grandfather's suicide. So her father, you can't say anything against Mao Zedong, so he named his daughter Little Hatred, but it was Little Hatred of Mao. And so when she was 12 years old, she went to her dad and said, kids are making fun of me for this name. And the Chinese interpret, there's a similar word that means a flower. So he renamed, only the father can name the daughter. But he literally named this is what happens when you're repressed. That freaking anger comes out. It will come out. And, in America, we get depressed and, neurotic and other things. Other cultures, end up naming their daughters Little Hatred. So it's everywhere that when something is repressed.
Yeah, I think of it, this is a gross analogy, but I think of it like popping a pimple. It's like you try to put pressure on it, so then everything only has one place to come out. So it's,
it's
way more.
Pimple popping theory of, it's well known.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I like that. That's good.
Yeah, very visual.
Very visual. Thank you. I'm going to throw up now.
Very creative.
Oh, thank you.
We forget all of us are visual thinkers. That's the other thing with the hunter. And you're probably the same way too. And this is the difference between you and your teachers. Most teachers are verbal thinkers. They think in words, they hear sounds, and of course they were taught the same way, and they always rise up and they get through the gatekeepers because they're verbal thinkers. Visual thinkers, the creative people like ourselves, they don't understand that. They think, well, there must be something wrong. We will give them a name. We'll call it attention deficit disorder. Like, what?
Yeah.
Where did you came up with that?
Yeah. You have to be disabled for thinking different.
Yeah.
It can't just be a different way to process information. It has to be you're broken in the brain. You should feel bad. You are bad, and you should feel bad.
The world is black, damn it.
It's yeah, it's like, again, I don't think or at least I think I've been very lucky with teachers. I will say that because, you know, most of my teachers I've really enjoyed. It's always been like in spite of the environment.
Yeah.
And it's, I feel like it's because they have that experience of being held back because they're not like fitting into that, you know, that role that they, you know, should. So they try to make it better themselves.
Chuck Yeager, by the way, is the guy.
empathy. That's what I kept saying.
You did?
Damn it. Yes.
It's there.
I said
I
it like
just
4
not
times.
think about it, and then it'll pop in my mind. But now, if that was a test, how long did that take? We've gone about 15 minutes, and I couldn't remember a name that I've read a zillion times. Even Kristen said it, and I couldn't hear it.
Yeah.
Example of what my life has been about.
It sounds like the teachers you had have empathy. They have the ability to put themselves in your shoes because they've been down some tough stuff themselves. So the empathy, I don't know where that falls on the convergent or divergent brain thing, but if you've got
like
empathy,
everybody can have empathy. Like,
There,
I think it's possible, but some people just, I heard like the sociopaths or some type of brain.
but I don't know the
isn't very
percentage
good
of the
at it.
population that I don't think that's that big.
I feel like people should be able to accept their pain, but also hold on to it. Because I feel like a lot of people that are the ones that say like, "Oh, I've, you know, I was able to do it, so you should too." Like that's sort of invalidating in a way. It's like,
Yeah.
are you just saying like you know, yeah, it hurts, but you're just being stupid because you can't.
Yeah.
And so like I feel like the teachers that are, you know, really strict and they'll, you know, whack your knuckles with a ruler and tell you like, oh, only 10% of people will get an A because they grade on a curve, and C will be an actual average, and they're like super strict, you know, multiple choice or tests, write out an essay, here's like the study thing we're going to do for the week. Like the really structured ones, they're not a teacher because they want to, they're a teacher because they're filling the cycle, not because they want to change anything, and not because they actually recognize that pain.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's the farmer mentality. They're not out to change anything. And in fact, they're out to keep things in the hierarchy. And the hierarchy is to become what? A PhD. So you start and you go to school, and you go to high school, and you get into a college, then you get your bachelor's, then you get your master's, then you get your graduate, you know, your PhD, then you do your postdoc. It's this hierarchy, and they want you to stay in. And a lot of really creative people, almost every one of them drops out of college. You can't name me an entrepreneur that hasn't dropped.
Hello.
Yeah, they all drop out of college at some point.
What's the point? Like, if I could actually go out and start doing what I want instead of listening to people and reading old books about something they did, why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
That's a whole nother podcast.
It is.
I tell you what, I've got some great stories. Beautiful, beautiful stories.
You know, I'm still stuck on him being on this list. I want to, do your parents know about
Let's
that?
make our own list of awesome people.
And say,
put all of us on the
why
list.
do you have a list of shame? Why are you shaming these students as a, you know, the public listing?
Wall of shame.
Again, it's not like or it's less of a list and more of a ranking that they give you.
I don't care. It's a hierarchy ranking. It's still it's a shame rank.
Does everyone have access to who's what, or do you just get your ranking?
It's given to you on your report card.
Okay, so it's not like on a wall at school.
Oh, see, I had it
purposely.
In my mind,
it's not like this person is the bad one. And
right.
I think it's just to motivate people to do better, which is not the right way to do that.
Report card have that on it.
Like, I feel like if you know, put punishment behind, you know, doing something the wrong way, or even more importantly, you put a reward behind doing something the way you want to, like makes that thing less appealing. An example, or I saw an amazing video essay about like how, you know, our view of motivation is like screwing up the school system, but an example they used is if I gave you a sandwich, I was like, hey, I made you the sandwich, you'd be like, oh my God, thank you. And then you'd be like, cool, that's a free sandwich. But if I gave you a sandwich and told you I'll pay you $5 to eat it, then you're probably going to go, what's wrong with the sandwich?
It's amazing.
And
That's exactly what I thought when you said that.
Yeah.
Must be.
and so it's the same sort of like thing behind school. Do this essay and you'll get a huge bump to your grade. You'll a huge thing, and then they'll allow you to get into college, and then you'll have a good life, and that makes it so the result is more important than the actual process.
I don't
Have
think
you ever
my
heard this
high school
term?
transcripts have ever come into play in my life at all, ever. Just so you know. And I did great. I graduated with a 4.0. Like, I'm not dumb, but it does not really freaking matter unless you need to expand your toolkit and learn from somebody who's actually empathetic and cares that you are understanding what you're being taught. That's a different thing. Sorry, Dad, I kind of cut you off. What were you about to say?
I was just first. I was gonna add to your. You not only got the 4 point, but you did it in a haze, a drug haze, which even made it harder. You got like a 6 point or something. Anyway,
Yeah, that's true.
Inside joke, not a joke.
Heavily depressed and medicated.
So she was.
But I
depressed.
survived. I tell you what.
She was a depressed creative person in that environment, and her out was to find drugs. I mean, that's what either illegally or people do it when they get older. You hear about all the time. I mean, they get overwhelmed with stress, and so they have to take a drug. What I was going to say is, have you heard the term "follow your bliss"? It's coined by Joseph Campbell, and a lot of people think that just means, oh, if I just follow, I'm going to become this writer, and so I'm going to move to Ojai and just write, and I'll be so happy. And then 2 years later, you're broke, and you got to get a job at McDonald's. That's not following your bliss. Following your bliss is doing what you love to do, being smart about it, but but if you follow doing what you love, like you said, being an art teacher, this is fantastic, because even if you don't make it as a famous commercial artist, you're getting hits of dopamine all along the way. If you're teaching art class and you teach kids art and you pass on, or you recognize some, you'll feel good about yourself. That's like what I'm doing in Cambodia. I constantly get hits of dopamine, and you can't see what I'm doing. Nobody can figure it out. I'm just supporting these people that we've destroyed their lives in war, and I'm trying to give back in little small ways, and sometimes just smiling at people. And I get hits all along the way. So that's following my bliss, and it sounds like
I think
noble profession.
I think everyone should just try to be nice, because, or not just because it'll make the world a better place, but just because it feels good. Like, it feels good to make someone stay. It feels good to make someone smile. So if you go out of your way to get that good feeling, then you're not only helping yourself, you're helping others.
And there are people out there
Bingo.
There are people out there that love to kill things, and they love to destroy.
Sociopath.
I mean, you read about. I mean, I saw the other day on the news. I mean, this is a documentary about this woman that killed a giraffe, and she was defending, how she's got this giraffe case, and how it helps the animal population. It was an older giraffe. They have all of these excuses, but no one ever said the one thing that I know, like my friends that belong to Safari Club, they love killing things. That makes them happy, but they don't admit that. They have all of these, well, it helps the herd. Well, there's no evidence on that. I mean, how does it help the herd? You're thinning out the herd. You hear that all the time. Well, there's no scientific evidence that this stuff.
That's what Hitler said.
That's what Hitler was doing. He was thinning out the herd. So that's carried to the nth degree. And when you say being nice, that's a very creative thing to do. I mean,
I love that. I like to say, come from a place of love, and you cannot fail. You just can't.
Yeah.
You can't fail.
Well, you'll create your own world, and you'll find people like the four of us. I looked at the four things that'll be around you and support your ideas and say, wow, that's great. I give a shit less about what your grades in history or in geography. I mean, geography, I would be pissed if you got a low grade geography. But you know, I could care less about your math scores. But look at the art that he's done. The score, my score is a triple A when I see that. That's it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
your
heart
art
is
is
the most important,
insane.
It's in.
I think.
Yeah.
Are you a good heart or a bad heart? Like, are you a good witch or a bad witch?
Kristen, my daughter has been.
Good witch, man.
She's this support in reverse. I created her somehow. I created her to help support me. But I've had times when, you know, hopefully you guys never go through this, but gone through divorces and stuff like that. And I talked to Kristen, and she goes, "Come from your heart, not your head." Well, my head would say, "Screw him, I'm going to keep all the money." My heart says, "I'm going to give him the money," and I would follow Kristen's advice. So I created somebody around me that reflects back that I'm a nice guy, that I'm a heart, you know, I've got a heart, and that I'm not heartless like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of guys my age that are,
I
you know,
hold them accountable.
what? What'd you say?
It's like you get to be held accountable, because I think that's really important, having
Hold me
a
accountable.
sounding board that knows everything that's
Yeah.
going on. You can't get away with being, oh, I'm kind of a good human. Like,
Hey, I'm going to keep some of the money.
I'm
Let
gonna
me
Yeah,
help you.
like
I'll
we,
just kill one person
Yeah.
today instead of 5. Like, that's still killing. You can't do that. Not that
And look,
dad's
and
killing
look what's
people.
happening on the news.
This got off on a tangent.
It's becoming so commonplace that nobody even pays attention. But yesterday, some guy, because of a dispute, that a fireman in Colorado, and he goes and kills the other guy and burns his house down, kills himself. Whoa, you know, this stuff, it just so common we don't even think about it, you know.
mm-hmm.
George Floyd is so common. Finally, people went, okay, enough. But you can go back as far as you want, and there's been George Floyd things happening to blacks
Yeah,
since I was a little kid, you know. It wasn't publicized like it is now.
mm-hmm.
Everybody's got a cell phone.
Good hearts.
Yeah, it's way easier for information to be spread outside of like journalism.
And
Like,
we
you
experience,
know, yeah,
like you said, experience it. We get to experience what we saw it. So you can't bullshit me that, oh, this was in self-defense. No, we all watched it we
mm-hmm.
experienced it, like you said.
Yeah. And it's like it's a lot more powerful when or like I feel like it's more powerful the more information about that one thing you get. Like I could tell you about, you know, I feel bad for forgetting his name, but the gentleman that got like pulled over by police and then shot 7 times in the
Oh my
back in
God.
front of his kids. Like I could tell you about that, but it's so much more powerful for you to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Versus
being
self.
able for that to be so widely available, I feel is definitely like a good aspect of it. You know, there are obviously very bad aspects of social media.
But
But-
it
Social
holds
problems.
people accountable way more than back in the
Mhm.
day, because
These are
there's
social
proof,
these are
accountability.
I'm sorry. These are problems that you guys, your age group, is now starting to discuss. My age group is a bunch of pandy ass baby boomers. They're so freaking afraid of their goddamn shadow this even, you know, tackle any of these issues. Very few of them do. You know,
Mhm.
we're going to make the country great again. Fuck you. It's already great. You know, I don't need some sociopath asshole to tell me that, you know, politically, I'm sorry, I'm going to breathe.
Yeah, we shouldn't get too political. I mean,
We're not going to get. We're
Yeah.
not gonna
Yeah,
politi-
yeah.
I can be political
Plus-
because
and we should
Plus-
wrap
I'm
it
that
up.
asshole's same
Yeah.
age.
Technically,
can
I
kick
want to
his
end on a
ass.
better note, but we should start wrapping it up in like
We,
the next.
we were
Alright.
naturally getting to a good stopping point with
Yeah, before I
goal
wanted to
of-
Donald Trump.
Yeah.
being a teacher, coming from a place of love, and that is one of the most, if I may say, the noblest professions is being a teacher. That's
Yeah.
like one of the most noble ways you can live your life, by helping others, and you know, the side benefit is it feels good, and hopefully you'll have some free time to help yourself with your side
Mhm.
art projects.
I thought
And
the
I think
most
we should
noble-
have him on again,
I'd love to.
just to like let's keep the progress check-ins
Yeah,
coming,
I
and
wanna
just see
check
how
in.
it's going this week, you know, kind of
interrogate him every week.
Yeah,
What
no,
are you
no,
on
no,
towards
no,
your
no.
goals?
No, we want to
All this-
lift you
But
up where you belong.
I'm going to make a prediction. I'm going to predict that you're going to feel good when this thing is over. You're just going to have a good feeling because people have acknowledged you, for who you are. Not the grades
Yeah.
you got, but for who you are and what you're doing.
It's definitely been a struggle for a lot of my life because I've never been very socially awkward, and I'm very bad at getting good grades. So I've never like joined any clubs or extracurricular or activities that have been really recognized for anything. So
What?
it's a bit of a
Perfect then.
it's a little
Join
bit of
our
a
club.
selfish part that I just want people to tell me like, oh, you're so good at this. It's nice, but
Hey,
You
there's
never
nothing
will.
wrong
a little
with
selfish
that.
sometimes.
There's
I
nothing
mean,
wrong with that.
heck,
And you are
yeah.
good, by the
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, that's
There's
the funny-
proof online. Like, we just saw your art. It's undeniable.
I
So
remember when I messaged you, I commented under your picture on Instagram, and I was like, wow, this is so good. And you were like, do you want to see the rest of it? And I was like, oh my God, yes. Like, freaking, you would even talk to me, a peasant learning to draw.
peasant.
Like,
A
yeah, I mean,
peasant.
like, comparing my art to
we're
this
not
guy,
worthy. We're not worthy.
I was
See?
blown
He's
away. I was like, wow,
not.
dang, this guy.
Here's a girl, just so you know, she's a writer and a poet, and this is kind of how we got started. I had dinner with her dad. Her dad's a friend of mine, and he's an eye doctor, and so she said that I forgot how the original conversation went, but I
It was
said,
a
well,
long
send me
time
some
ago.
of the stuff you've written. So she was, well, I've written a little thing about this vampire. She sent me like 30 page, I said, well, can you, just map out the thing? It's like 30 pages of this, like create.
He's like, you
Just,
ready
yeah,
for
but I
this?
don't really,
Here, bam.
like I'm looking at it like, oh my God, here's somebody who has the potential. I'm not saying she's going to, but she's got the potential of being like, the Harry Potter type woman,
A good writer.
to write like that. Now look at
Yeah.
her reacting.
She takes action. That's the hardest part.
Yeah.
Quick,
Taking
go,
action.
Don't tell me I'm good. That's why we call this podcast the Creatively Unworthy.
Creatively unworthy.
We're unworthy of praise because we've been taught that. Anyway, that's enough I'm going to say. We should end it. Thank you very much for coming.
All right.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
for
you
having me.
so much.
Yeah.
This has been a really special podcast.
Yeah, it's been
I like
actually
it.
probably
I like
the best one we've had.
Yeah.
Very,
Aw.
Very
It
cool.
is.
very
I'm not
heartfelt.
blowing
Yeah.
smoke at you. I'm just.
You're excused, 'cause you're always late, overweight, and totally